Ethan Moore had always seemed like an ordinary man, quiet and withdrawn, while Officer Daniel Harris was the town's trusted protector. But behind Ethan's calm exterior, a deadly obsession had been silently brewing, threatening to shatter the peace of their small Wyoming community. In the heart of Wyoming, where the endless plains stretch out under wide, open skies, there was a small town that seemed untouched by the troubles of the outside world. Life there moved slowly, with a rhythm dictated by the seasons and the routines of its residents. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, and doors were rarely locked, a testament to the deep trust people had in one another. Crime was almost unheard of, and the local sheriff's office had little more than routine paperwork most days. In such a place, the idea of real danger felt distant, almost like a story from another world. It was in this quiet, unassuming town that Ethan Moore lived, a man who outwardly blended into the calm of daily life. To most people, Ethan appeared ordinary. He kept to himself, worked odd jobs that never lasted long, and avoided large gatherings. He was polite when spoken to, and yet there was a noticeable distance in his eyes, a sense of isolation that made him seem like he was always observing, always calculating. The townspeople considered him a little strange, but harmless. Children rarely played near his property, and neighbors found excuses not to engage too deeply, sensing an invisible wall that separated him from the community. What no one knew was that Ethan carried a burden, a festering resentment that had been growing for years. At the center of this bitterness was Officer Daniel Harris, the town's respected lawman. To the community, Harris was a hero, admired for his unwavering dedication and for maintaining peace in the town. He was the kind of officer people trusted with their lives, known for stepping into dangerous situations when others would have turned away. But to Ethan, Harris represented the person responsible for a personal loss that had shattered his life, though no one could have guessed the extent of the pain or the reasons behind it. Ethan's life had been marked by disappointment and frustration, but this particular grievance consumed him in ways that nothing else could. Every interaction, every routine he observed was filtered through the lens of anger and revenge. In private, he replayed events over and over, rewriting moments in his mind until Harris emerged as the antagonist in a story Ethan told himself endlessly. It was a darkness that had taken root silently, almost imperceptibly, until it became the defining element of his existence. Despite the outward calm of the town, there was a tension growing in the shadows, a quiet storm that no one could sense. Ethan's movements were deliberate yet unremarkable, a careful balance that allowed him to exist unnoticed while plotting the course of his thoughts. The quiet streets, the familiar faces, and the routine lives of the townspeople provided him with the perfect cover. The townspeople, absorbed in their own lives, remained blissfully unaware of the intensity of his inner world. Every morning, Ethan walked the same paths, drove the same streets, and observed without revealing the weight of his obsession. The very ordinariness of his behavior became a mask for something far more dangerous. Underneath the mundane surface, he nurtured a plan that was slowly, methodically taking shape. The small town, with its sense of safety and routine, had no inkling that the calm exterior of one of its residents concealed a growing storm of resentment, obsession, and the potential for a chilling act of revenge. Ethan's obsession with Officer Harris began to deepen in ways that went far beyond idle resentment. At first it was subtle, almost imperceptible. He would notice Harris's routines, the small habits that most people ignored, a particular route he took on his daily patrol, the coffee shop he visited every morning, the way he paused at certain intersections. Ethan observed these details quietly, making mental notes, filing each piece of information away for later use. His attention to detail grew obsessive, and he began keeping notebooks, sketching maps of Harris's movements, and noting times with meticulous precision. Every deviation, every pattern, became a piece of a larger puzzle in Ethan's mind. What began as a quiet fixation soon transformed into an all-consuming obsession. He spent hours studying the town, the streets, and even the neighbors who might inadvertently notice his presence. Ethan's life became structured entirely around Harris, the rhythm of his days dictated by when and where the officer would be. He began to collect tools and equipment, items that at first seemed innocuous to anyone glancing in his direction. But in reality, each object had a purpose, each purchase a calculated step toward a plan that only he fully understood. The basement of his small home transformed into a workspace of careful preparation. Walls were covered with photographs, notes, and diagrams, each one a record of Harris's life and habits. Ropes, maps, and other materials were organized with precision, placed exactly where Ethan could access them at a moment's notice. The intensity of his focus isolated him further from the rest of the town. Friends and acquaintances who had occasionally tried to engage him found him increasingly distant, absorbed in tasks they could not comprehend. Even the jobs he held were secondary to his obsession. He tolerated them only because they provided cover, a semblance of normalcy that helped maintain the illusion of an ordinary life. Over time, his plans became more detailed, more methodical. He envisioned multiple scenarios, each carefully weighed for risk and potential outcome. Every day, he rehearsed in his mind how events would unfold, imagining how Harris would react and adjusting his strategy accordingly. Sleep was often sacrificed for these mental exercises as Ethan became consumed with perfecting his plan. Despite this growing obsession, he remained outwardly calm. To the casual observer, he was simply a quiet, reclusive man with peculiar habits, nothing more. But beneath that calm exterior, the storm of his fixation raged, building momentum like a river swelling behind an invisible dam. Ethan's fixation on Harris was no longer a private grievance. It had become a consuming purpose, an all-encompassing force driving his every thought and action. The quiet town around him continued to go about its daily routines, unaware of the meticulous plotting taking place in plain sight. Every step he took, every decision he made, was designed to bring him closer to a moment that, in his mind, would finally satisfy the long-held desire for revenge. The obsession had taken root fully, and there was no turning back. As Ethan's planning intensified, small signs began to emerge that something was not quite right, though no one could yet grasp the full extent of his intentions. He moved through the town with a deliberate, calculated precision, his actions carefully designed to avoid drawing attention while still advancing his secret agenda. Neighbors occasionally noticed him purchasing unusual items, strange tools, or materials that seemed far beyond what a man living alone in a quiet town would need. At the local hardware store, the shopkeeper remarked quietly to himself about Ethan buying rope, duct tape, and other equipment in unusual quantities, items that would ordinarily raise eyebrows if someone connected the dots. Yet the shopkeeper, like everyone else, dismissed it as eccentric behavior. Ethan also began photographing the town and its streets, capturing the flow of traffic, police vehicles, and the movement of Harris himself. He carried a small notebook where he meticulously documented the times, routes, and behaviors he observed. The notebook grew thicker with each passing week, filled with sketches and notes that transformed ordinary observations into a web of data designed for a purpose only he understood. Occasionally, a passing motorist would see him crouched near intersections or along quiet streets, camera in hand, and wonder what he was doing. Some whispered about his odd behavior, but nothing concrete emerged, and the town largely ignored these subtle warnings. In parallel, Ethan's obsession began to infiltrate his personal life. He withdrew further from friends and acquaintances, turning down invitations and avoiding any social interaction that might distract him from monitoring Harris. His daily routines were entirely dictated by the patterns he had studied. The times Harris left the station, when he stopped for coffee, the roads he preferred at certain hours. Every variable mattered, and Ethan adjusted his own life to align with this obsession. The town's sense of security remained intact, but the tension beneath the surface was growing. While Ethan carefully plotted, Harris continued his daily work, oblivious to the scrutiny he was under. He patrolled the streets, responded to calls, and maintained the routine of a respected officer who had earned the trust of his community. Small incidents, traffic stops, neighborhood disputes, even routine paperwork, were all part of Harris's ordinary life, yet each one was being cataloged by Ethan with obsessive attention to detail. It was a quiet but persistent threat, invisible to all but the man orchestrating it. The signs that could have alerted someone to the danger were subtle and scattered. A neighbor noticing Ethan photographing police cars, an employee at the store remarking on his unusual purchases, a distant driver observing him taking notes along the roadside. Individually, none of these seemed alarming, and collectively they were still easy to dismiss as harmless oddities. But in reality, they were pieces of a much larger and far more disturbing puzzle, a web being woven in secret. The quiet town, wrapped in its sense of safety, remained unaware of the brewing storm. Ethan's fixation had grown beyond simple resentment. It had become an obsession with control, prediction, and ultimately the execution of a plan that had been months in the making. Each day brought him closer to a moment that could shatter the community's sense of normalcy, yet the outward calm masked the danger perfectly. The tension was building silently, like the slow, unstoppable approach of a storm over the plains, gathering momentum without warning, preparing to strike at the heart of the town and the officer who had become the target of Ethan's unrelenting focus. The night Ethan had been planning for months finally arrived, and with it, a sense of tense anticipation that had been building in his mind for weeks. He had rehearsed the scenario over and over, imagining every possible outcome, every movement, every hesitation. The quiet town, with its peaceful streets and sleeping residents, seemed to hold its breath, though no one knew it. Ethan moved carefully through the darkness, keeping to the shadows, avoiding any light that might reveal his presence. He followed the familiar route that Harris took each evening, memorized from countless days of observation. Every turn, every stop, every pause had been accounted for, and Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and fear. This was the moment when months of planning, obsession, and preparation would meet reality. He carried only what he deemed necessary, tools arranged meticulously in a backpack, ready to execute a plan he had crafted to the smallest detail. The streets were empty, the air cold and crisp, and the town seemed to lie in perfect silence, amplifying the pounding of his own heartbeat. As he approached the area where he had decided to act, everything seemed to align. The street was quiet, shadows long, and Harris's car appeared in the distance, just as he had expected. Ethan crouched behind a fence, eyes fixed on the target, mind racing with rehearsed movements and imagined outcomes. But then, an unexpected event shattered the precision of his plan. Harris, without warning, made a sudden turn, moving away from the anticipated route. A stranded motorist on the side of the road had caught his attention, and he had stopped to help, unaware that this minor act of kindness would completely disrupt Ethan's timing. Panic flickered briefly in Ethan's mind. Months of preparation were unraveling with a single unpredictable choice. He hesitated, caught between executing the plan as it was and adapting to the unforeseen circumstances. The quiet calm of the night had shifted. What had seemed certain was no longer guaranteed. Ethan realized that the opportunity he had been obsessively anticipating was slipping through his fingers. His meticulous preparation could not account for randomness, for the unpredictability of another human being's actions. Frustration and desperation surged through him, clouding his focus and forcing him to retreat. He moved back into the shadows, unseen, as Harris continued toward the stranded motorist, unaware of the threat that had been so close. The plan, painstakingly crafted over weeks, had failed not because of exposure or discovery, but because life refused to follow a script. Ethan returned to his home, heart racing, mind reeling with the failure and the knowledge that he had come frighteningly close to crossing a line from which there would be no return. The streets remained quiet, the town oblivious to the danger that had almost unfolded, and Harris continued his duties the next day with no awareness of how narrowly he had escaped. In that night, the invisible tension that had been building finally came to a head, revealing both the fragility of Ethan's obsession and the unpredictability of the world around him. The carefully woven plan which had consumed him for months was forced to pause, leaving him to confront the limits of his own control and the stark reality that even the most precise schemes can be undone by a single unanticipated moment. Days after the failed attempt, the quiet town began to sense that something was amiss, though no one could have guessed the scale of the danger that had nearly unfolded. Ethan's retreat from the streets had not gone unnoticed by a few observant neighbors who mentioned his unusual behavior to local authorities, sparking curiosity that led to a deeper investigation. What began as minor concern quickly escalated when a patrol officer investigating unrelated suspicious activity near Ethan's home decided to take a closer look inside. The discovery was chilling. The basement, previously thought to be a simple storage space, revealed a meticulous operation that laid bare the depth of Ethan's obsession. Walls were covered with photographs of Harris, maps of the town's streets, and detailed notes on his routines. Every day, every stop, every minor habit had been cataloged with precision. Tools were arranged neatly: ropes, duct tape, and other implements that left little doubt about Ethan's intentions. It became immediately clear that this had been more than idle resentment. The officer quickly called for backup, and the local law enforcement, shocked by the discovery, secured the property and began piecing together the full extent of Ethan's planning. Arresting him was straightforward, but the tension in the room was palpable. The quiet man the town had known for years was suddenly exposed as someone capable of extreme, premeditated violence. As news spread, residents struggled to reconcile the image of the unassuming, withdrawn neighbor with the chilling evidence of obsession and intent. The town, previously wrapped in a sense of security, realized how close it had come to tragedy. Officer Harris, unaware of the immediate threat he had narrowly avoided, was informed of the situation. The revelation was unsettling. The very person he had passed countless times on the streets, the one who had seemed harmless, had been orchestrating a plan targeting him with dangerous precision. Harris took a moment to reflect on the fragile nature of safety in a place where everyone thought they knew each other. The story left lasting scars on the community. People who had once felt completely secure now found themselves questioning familiar faces, wondering who might be hiding darkness behind a calm exterior. Parents were cautious, neighbors watched more closely, and the local law enforcement tightened protocols, recognizing that threats could emerge from the most unexpected places. Ethan, now in custody, became the subject of intense scrutiny. Psychologists and law enforcement officials tried to understand what had driven him to such an extreme, piecing together the obsessive patterns that had consumed his mind for months. Interviews, records, and evidence from the basement revealed a man deeply fixated, capable of meticulous planning and willing to let obsession override all other aspects of his life. The town slowly began to heal, but the incident left an indelible mark. The narrative of a quiet, ordinary town suddenly confronted with the terrifying reality of hidden danger became a cautionary tale. It reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, that obsession could grow quietly in the shadows, and that even the most ordinary people might conceal intentions capable of shaking a community to its core. The incident ultimately underscored the importance of vigilance, community awareness, and the thin line between safety and chaos that exists in every small town, no matter how peaceful it may seem.